On the weekend that Palestine Action was prescribed, the Scottish National Party has come out in support of this organisation, in support, therefore, of Hamas and Iran against British forces, and to say that they want the Israeli Defence Force to become a prescribed group. I'm going to go through in this video not just what the Scottish National Party are doing once again to act in a treasonous fashion, not just against the United Kingdom, but against the Scottish people and the West. But also, I'm going to show you some of the information about the way that the political left has come out this weekend and shown their colours in the way that they are determined, they are obsessed with supporting a level of terrorist activity which must be and should be wholly unacceptable in Britain. Hello, this is Andre Walker with a bit of a cough, which is surprising at this time of year. Please do subscribe to this channel, but more importantly, hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all my videos as soon as they are released. Well, I have to say to you, Palestine Action, I support what the Home Secretary has done in order to make it a prescribed group. I worry, first of all, about terrorism. Before we get into this video, I want to explain to you what I believe an element of terrorism is. Not all of terrorism, but an element. It's what I call a veto of one, which is you are so narcissistic, you are so self-obsessed, you are so selfish that you believe that if you don't agree with something, nobody else is allowed to do it. So, as an example, I believe that that it should be a terrorist offence to throw a milkshake over somebody. Somebody said to me the other day, well, what about this Joe Brand? Oh, it was a shame it wasn't battery acid. And I said, look, in a sense, I agree with her sentiment. I think she was right to say that. And the reason she was right to say it is because that proves what these people are really interested in. Because what's happening is very simply this. When somebody doesn't like Nigel Farage, when somebody doesn't like, even John Prescott, when somebody doesn't like Ed Miliband, and who else has been attacked, so it's not just on the right, what they do is they throw something at them. And the reason they throw a milkshake, the reason they throw an egg, is because they don't have a gun, because they don't have Semtex, because they don't have battery acid. But if they had that, they would do it. And here's the reason why. Because, as I said before, it's the veto of one. I don't want Nigel Farage to go on a walkabout, therefore I will stop him talking to anybody. I don't like him, therefore you're not allowed to hear it either. I don't like John Prescott, therefore I'm going to hit him with an egg, and nobody else gets to hear him. That should not be allowed in Britain. And when you are talking about politicians being distant from ordinary people, look at it. That's why. I was in Runcorn and I was in a hotel, funnily enough, and I'm going to have to anonymise some of these details just because I don't want to be unfair to the security services. But look, Nigel Farage now has that armour-plated vehicle, thanks to James O'Brien claiming that he was behind the Southport protests. But anyway, he's got all these vehicles. He wants to do a walkabout in, I think, somewhere like, I can't remember whether it's Ellesmere Port, I might be wrong, somewhere in the Runcorn constituency. And anyway, I saw 5 undercover vehicles and there must have been 20 additional guards. That's in addition to what he takes normally to places, and in addition, no doubt, to uniformed officers and private sector security guards. That's what it takes to do a walkabout now because of these milkshake people. And I think if we start locking them up for significant amounts of time, that would be good. Because at the heart of it, yes, there is an element of terrorism which is about threatening the public. Yes, there's an element of terrorism about getting into the papers. Yes, there's an element about terrorism of causing destruction, but there's also an element of terrorism which says, I live in a democratic society, but that's not good enough for me. I believe that what I say ought to be the benchmark by which you live. Somebody said, why is it that Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness are terrorists and Nelson Mandela is not? And it's very, very simple. The reason, as far as I'm concerned, it's because Nelson Mandela didn't live in a democratic society. And so if Nelson Mandela had wanted to go to the ballot box and run for election against the apartheid regime, it wouldn't have been possible for him to do that. Therefore, because there is no democratic outlet, he has to revert to other means. And you can't blame him for reverting to those other means. But when you talk about Extinction Rebellion and people like that, it's unbelievable. I mean, if you look at Extinction Rebellion, what did they say? They said they would shut down the capital unless the following happened. Point number 1, that all prosecutions against climate activists should end. That's an end to independent courts. that they should no longer arrest people undertaking climate protests. That is an end to independent policing. That they should now ban all climate denial from the media. That is an end to independent media. And then they should say that there should be a priority for climate activism, which means that we now amend our constitution based on their threats. And finally, they said that Parliament should play second fiddle to the creation of a People's Assembly, a Supreme Soviet of the United Kingdom. Now, those claims, those 5 demands, are so completely outrageous. We will shut down the capital. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll drag you by the hair. I'll tell you what. You glue yourself to the road or to the motorway. The priority should be getting your hand off. If you need a chisel, just chisel them off. It doesn't bother me. If you need some heavy solvents to get them off that's going to be caustic on the skin, do that. It doesn't bother me because they're there in order to veto you. So let's get now to Palestine Action. Now, I want to say to you, if you believe the behaviour of the Israeli Defence Force is unacceptable, that's fine by me. Go out and protest. I don't like the way people protest every weekend and kind of move in, but okay, fine, I'll live with it. But what we have seen by Palestine Action attacking RAF planes is absolutely unacceptable. These people, our servicemen, are attempting to defend the United Kingdom, and then we see James Dornan from the SNP saying that we should be supporting Palestine Action. No, hang on. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign that wants to go out every weekend protesting, that's fine. We're talking not about supporting Palestinians. We're talking about this veto of one. I don't want British planes up in the air, therefore I'm going to smash them up. No. That's not acceptable, and that should be prescribed. But what's unbelievable is that James Dornan from the SNP is not saying, oh, let's criminalise both Palestine Action and the Israeli Defence Force. He's saying just the Israeli Defence Force. And then you see Bob Villan shouting death to the IDF. Well, we've seen examples of where that has caused significant problems. We've seen that in Australia, there were protests outside the Israeli embassy chanting and quoting what Bob Villan had to say. Now, I'm going to tell you something about the BBC, who once again have behaved abominably in this situation. When you watch my TV and radio show, what you may not know is what you're watching is 14 seconds ago. There's what's called the dump button. So if you imagine within the hard drive, it's got 14 seconds recorded and you're watching something 14 seconds ago, which is why they always go, can you turn your radio down when you talk to me? Because what happens is we're starting to hear back stuff that's weird. And of course, what happens also is people phone up, but don't put their ear to the phone and try and talk to the TV, which causes a fair amount of confusion. Anyway, the reason it's 14 seconds ago is because there's a dump button. So what happens is I can press the dump button. There's both one with me and with the producer in the gallery. And so you can press the dump button and it goes and it deletes the previous 7 seconds. So that is to say that instead of it being 14 seconds behind, it now jumps to being 7 seconds behind, if you see what I mean. So 7 seconds disappears. You can press it a second time and it dumps that 7 seconds. And what it then does, just for those people that are geeky, it ever so slightly slows down the show for about 15 minutes to build up that 14 seconds again. Anyway, the reason I make that point is because the BBC could enact this piece of equipment for Glastonbury, but of course they don't. They do use it, by the way, for the Eurovision Song Contest. You will hear the Eurovision Song Contest go silent when somebody says the wrong thing, and it sounds a bit weird. They are actually using the mute button. So you can do it with the mute button, you can do it with a delay, and you can do it with a mixture of both. But obviously, the BBC didn't want to do that because they support this sort of protest and this sort of terrorism. And I think that's unacceptable. But before we really talk about what we need to do next, why don't we have a look at what appeared on Sky News? I'm going to show you the whole report, even though it's about 2.5 minutes, because I think it is interesting.
Who should be prescribed are the ones killing children.
Arrested for allegedly supporting a newly designated terrorist organisation.
You are under arrest under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act.
From midnight on Friday, it became illegal to be a member of or to support Palestine Action after the Home Secretary prescribed the group, placing it alongside the likes of Hamas and Al-Qaeda. Displaying the group's logo is enough to potentially face a lengthy prison term. Yet that didn't stop dozens of people standing up against what they say is an attack on democratic rights.
Are you not afraid that you're going to potentially go to jail for 14 years?
Can't arrest us all.
It does seem that there is quite a lot of police here to do exactly that, though.
There are so many people on side. I repeat, they can't arrest us all.
I support the unprescription of Palestine Action because I don't think they've done anything that warrants them being put in the category of terrorists. I think there's a noble tradition of civil disobedience in Britain.
For the government, a line was crossed after Palestine Action was accused of breaking into RAF Bryce Norton and spraying Air Force jets with red paint last month, causing millions of pounds of damage. There's no suggestion anyone at the central London protest was involved.
The Metropolitan Police had warned protesters in advance that if they showed support for Palestine Action, they would be arrested. Now that the group has been prescribed, clearly those warnings were not heeded.
Lawyers for the now outlawed group launched an 11th-hour legal bid on Friday to block the ban from coming into effect, but judges at the High Court and the Court of Appeal backed the Home Secretary.
Do you feel like you've got to be careful with what you say now?
Definitely, I would say yes, especially here.
Among those arrested under the Terrorism Act, 83-year-old Reverend Sue Parfitt. Yet the authorities didn't manage to round everybody up.
They didn't arrest me despite my badge this time, but I think next time they'll be taking me.
Protesters are vowing to continue their action until the group is deprescribed. Now they will have to wait to find out the sentences of those arrested on Saturday and decide whether continued support is a risk worth taking. Oliver Whitfield-Mirchich, Sky News, London.
Well, there you have it. You know, people are out and about openly supporting a prescribed terrorist group. I mean, where have we come to as a country if they're doing that? I think the fat guy, by the way, probably shouldn't be prosecuted because he says, I'm here to protest against Palestine Action being prescribed, which I think is something that's acceptable. But we are seeing time and time again now that people are attempting to take to the street, attempting to enact violence in order to get their own way. And I don't think it's acceptable. But here's the thing that I want to say moreover than any of this. When I looked at Glastonbury, I really thought I was looking at what I think many of you think I was looking at, which is a group of entitled middle-class kids coming up with the latest fad thing. If you remember Edward Colston in Bristol, remember they pulled down his statue, the slave owner of Bristol. Do you know Edward Colston owned no slaves ever? He was a cloth salesman, and because he'd imported so much cloth from Africa, they made him the deputy governor of the Royal Africa Company when he retired. Now, the Royal Africa Company had a division that dealt in slaves, and therefore Edward Colston was qualified as a slave owner. But that's not as bad as Wordsworth, where they attempted to say that Wordsworth benefited from slavery because, get this, his brother-in-law was a captain of a ship that was owned by the East India Company, and the East India Company dealt in slaves, even though his brother-in-law had nothing to do with it, and Wordsworth was a campaigner against slavery. Unbelievable, the level of dishonesty here. But I think that's because they want to prove their worthiness, don't they? You are filming a statue of a Victorian, or probably before Victorian actually. You're filming Edward Colston's statue being pulled down because he's a slave owner when he wasn't, using a phone made by a 9-year-old in China. It's so hypocritical. I saw a group of kids who went to the Extinction Rebellion protest and afterwards went to McDonald's. And you think, why would you do that? Go to a vegan protest, go to an anti-capitalist protest and go to McDonald's afterwards. And I think it's because they lack moral courage, but also they know that at university you're never going to get a bird unless you go along with it. So they do their duty, their box ticking, and they get there. But let's talk specifically about Gaza, because the question should be, should we back Hamas? Should we back Iran? No, we should not. And here is the reason. Look, think about the suffering of the people of Gaza. Does anybody, well, nobody should believe that what has happened in Gaza is acceptable. You know, the Israeli Defense Force, yes, they have tried to reduce civilian casualties, but it's still a horrendous humanitarian disaster. And what has happened there is proof that we are getting it completely wrong. The people of Gaza receive more aid money than any other humans who have ever existed in the history of the world, and yet it has made it worse. If you look at it, we as the United Kingdom wanted to donate lampposts to Gaza, but we couldn't because they were cutting up the lampposts and turning them into rockets to fire into Israel. That's what has happened with this country being so badly governed. And what I want to say to people, and what I hope I will persuade you to say to people, is yes, we do need to free Gaza. Yes, we do need to free Palestine, but we need to start with their own leadership. Think about what Hamas did on the 7th of October. They knew that Israel was about to sign the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia, thus ending conflict between the two and normalising the relationship. That's what Donald Trump did in terms of his negotiation. And they decided to go for an attack that was so egregious that it would guarantee that Israel would have to invade. Think about that. They're not saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if we can make Gaza better? They're sat at a 5-star hotel in Qatar, having earned £1 billion each off stolen aid money, saying, let's ensure peace doesn't happen. We're shitting ourselves that peace might happen between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We must stop it. That's why they slit the throats of kids and people in the kibbutz, in the peace kibbutz. That's why, you know, people who were flying peace banners were taken out first. That's the Nova Festival. The Nova Festival was about peace in between Jews and Palestinians. Of course they attacked the Nova Festival because they wanted the attack to be so egregious that the war continued. And why did they want the war to continue? Because that is the best way to guarantee they can stick their hand in the till for aid money. They are just a bunch of thieves. And what are you doing? When you're flying the flag for Palestinian Action, what are you doing? You're supporting a terror group, which is illegal in the United Kingdom. But anyway, fine. You're supporting a terror group which has subjugated the people of Gaza. Hamas won the election in Gaza. Yes, they did. They threw their rival candidates off buildings. They murdered journalists. They abolished independent education. There is no judicial oversight. There's no rule of law. There's no legislative scrutiny. Money that goes into the country, God knows where it's accounted for. When the Israeli settlers left Gaza, they left a fruit greenhouse facility, I don't know exactly what it's called, indoor farm, I don't know, vertical farm or whatever, that supplied M&S with organic fruit and veg, made a fortune. It was bought by the international community. The Israeli settlers were going to knock it down, but it was bought by the international community and gifted to the people of Gaza. Within 48 hours, it had been taken down, the glass being sold second-hand in the markets, the metal being sent for recycling, because in the ground under it, there were pipes that were being used for irrigation, and they were repurposed to be turned into missiles. What is the humanity in any of this? To turn round and say, oh, let's back that government continuing. I think what we need to do, and this is my suggestion for Gaza, first of all, the SNP can take a hike. I'd tell you what, I'd prescribe them as a terrorist group, but certainly James Dornan should be locked up for supporting Palestine Action. And of course, all the people at the BBC who've supported all of this, they should be in trouble as well. They won't be, but fine. But here's my suggestion. What Britain should be doing is backing a Jordanian governor. People forget, Britain's ally in the Middle East is not Israel, it's Jordan. And we demanded a Palestinian state. I don't know if you know, there has been a two-state solution. Palestine was cut in half. Part was given to the Palestinians, which are now called Jordanians, and part was given to the Israelis. And even then, we were against the deal. We wanted it all to be Jordan. But our ally is Jordan. There should be a Jordanian governor in there. And we should build the ports that Donald Trump was talking about. And I'll tell you why. Because wall off the Israelis, right? If I was the governor of Gaza, I'd say wall off the Israelis. We're going to build a port in Gaza, and we're going to trade with the world using the Suez Canal, which is relatively close to Gaza. And what we'll do is we'll do free trade deals with every country in the Islamic world, and we'll be like Singapore. They'll make an absolute fortune. And now the Israelis can say, you can say all day, oh, but the Israelis will blockade a port. They wouldn't blockade a port that was owned by the Americans and secured by the Americans. And if you had a Jordanian governor, you could bring in Jordanian police. You could rebuild the university system. You could rebuild the court system. You could rebuild the police system. You could create judicial oversight and proper legislative scrutiny. If you look at what Mikhail Saakashvili did in Georgia, when the Soviet Union fell, he decided that one of the problems that he had was corruption within the police. Do you know that Saakashvili, as president of Georgia, obviously Georgia in Eastern Europe, not Georgia in the United States of America, he sacked every single police officer and knocked down every single police station and built the new police stations out of glass and got the new police officers recruited from scratch. That ended a huge amount of post-Soviet corruption in Georgia. Georgia is not perfect, but certainly it's significantly better in terms of its prohibition of corruption than Armenia next door, even though I very much like the Armenian people. We should be on the side of the people of Gaza. And yes, we should call out the Israeli Defence Force, and we should expect a higher standard from the Israeli Defence Force than Hamas would ever offer. That is the nature of being a Western country. We should support Israel's right to national security, but most importantly, we should say that we do not support the terrorists, we support the ordinary Palestinian and Gazan people. And the fact that the SNP don't do that, the fact that Glastonbury doesn't do that, the fact that BBC doesn't do that, the fact that those smelly lefties that you saw earlier from Sky News don't do that is just a function of their own selfishness and stupidity. They care more about their own twisted political views than they do about genuinely helping people. Never, ever trust a virtue signaller. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe, hit the bell notification, but also donate to the Patriot Fund. God, I keep saying this, I will get out the 2 monthly update of what we've been spending your money on. Not vast amounts of money come in, but nonetheless, we are going to make sure that we are supporting patriotic causes. Just in this embryonic way, we are getting real results. So please do subscribe, please do send a donation down there, and that gives me your email address, which means I can also send you out the update when I finally get round to doing it. Okay, until next time, arrivederci and goodbye.